Captain Sarah Martinez crouched behind the concrete barrier, her rifle scope tracking movement in the abandoned warehouse district. The rain hammered against her tactical gear, creating rivers of mud that made every step treacherous. She had been in position for 6 hours, watching a building that intelligence claimed housed a high-value target. The mission briefing had been standard. Terrorist cell leader. Weapons cache. Extract intelligence and eliminate threat. But something felt wrong from the moment she arrived in this forgotten corner of Eastern Europe. The streets were too quiet. The locals had vanished too completely. Even the stray dogs that usually roamed these areas were nowhere to be seen. Sarah adjusted her position, feeling the familiar weight of her Barrett M82 sniper rifle. She had made shots that other soldiers called impossible. Her record spoke for itself. 47 confirmed kills across 3 deployments. Each one precise. Each one necessary. Each one haunting her dreams in ways she would never admit to her commanding officers. Through her scope, she watched windows that remained dark. No movement. No heat signatures on her thermal imaging. The target building looked abandoned, just like every other structure in this industrial wasteland. But her instincts screamed that eyes were watching her from somewhere in the maze of concrete and steel. Her radio crackled to life. Viper 1, this is Control. Status report. Sarah pressed the transmit button. Control, this is Viper 1. No movement detected. Target building appears empty. Recommend reassessment of intelligence. Static filled her earpiece for several seconds before Control responded. Negative, Viper 1. Intelligence is solid. Maintain position and await further orders. Sarah frowned. The voice on the radio sounded different. Younger. Less professional than the usual communications officer. She made a mental note to ask about it during debrief, assuming she lived long enough to have one. Hours passed like days. The rain continued its relentless assault, turning her hide position into a muddy nightmare. Sarah had learned patience during her years as a sniper, but this felt different. Every instinct told her to move, to find better cover, to question the mission parameters that had brought her to this place. As darkness began to fall, she finally saw what she had been waiting for. A figure moved past a third-floor window. Brief. Almost ghost-like, but enough to confirm that the building was not as empty as it appeared. Sarah adjusted her scope, calculating distance and wind speed. 400 meters. Slight crosswind from the east. The shot was well within her capabilities. She had made much more difficult kills in far worse conditions. The figure appeared again, this time lingering near the window longer. Sarah could see it was a man, medium build, dark clothing. He seemed to be looking directly at her position, though she knew that was impossible. Her camouflage was perfect. Her position was carefully chosen to blend with the surrounding debris. But then the man did something that made Sarah's blood run cold. He raised his right hand and made a series of precise gestures. Quick movements that looked random to an untrained eye. But Sarah recognized them immediately. Military hand signals. Specific ones. Signals that only special operations personnel would know. The man was telling her that he knew she was there. More than that, he was identifying himself as friendly forces. The signals were asking for confirmation of her identity and mission parameters. Sarah's mind raced. This was not in the mission briefing. There was no mention of friendly forces in the area. No other units were supposed to be operating in this sector. But the hand signals were unmistakably military. Professional. Precise. She grabbed her radio. Control, this is Viper 1. I have eyes on target building. Individual using military hand signals. Request clarification on friendly forces in area. The response came quickly. Too quickly. Viper 1, no friendly forces authorized in your sector. Unknown individual is likely enemy using captured intelligence. Take the shot. Sarah hesitated. Something was very wrong. The hand signals she had witnessed were not basic military gestures that could be learned from captured manuals. They were advanced special operations signals, ones that required extensive training to execute properly. The figure in the window repeated the sequence, adding new elements. Sarah watched in growing amazement as the man began using signals that she had only learned during her black operations training. Signals that were classified far above the level of standard infantry or even most special forces units. These were Delta Force signals, Navy SEAL communications, the kind of ham language that was taught only to operators who worked in the darkest corners of military operations, the kind of signals that officially did not exist. Sarah's training told her to follow orders. Take the shot. Complete the mission. But her instinct screamed that something was terribly wrong with this entire operation. The man in the window began a new sequence. Sarah watched through her scope, her heart pounding as she recognized what he was telling her. The signals were a warning. He was telling her that she was being set up, that her position was compromised, that she needed to move immediately. Then, he added something that made her stomach drop. The final signal was one she had only seen twice in her career, both times during operations so classified that she had signed documents threatening her with life imprisonment if she ever spoke about them. It was the emergency extraction signal used by deep cover operatives, the kind of signal that meant the operator had discovered they were being hunted by their own side. Sarah's radio crackled again. Viper 1, why have you not engaged? Take the shot immediately. That is a direct order. She stared through her scope at the figure in the window. He was no longer making hand signals. Instead, he was holding something up to the glass, something small and rectangular. Sarah adjusted her scope's magnification. What she saw made her blood freeze. The man was holding up a military ID card. Even at this distance, she could make out enough detail to see that it was genuine. More importantly, she could see the classification level marked on the card. It was higher than her own clearance level. Much higher. Whoever was in that building outranked her significantly. They were deep cover military, operating at a level that made her own black operations look routine. Viper 1, you are in violation of direct orders. Engage target immediately or face court-martial. Sarah's finger rested on the trigger. One squeeze, and the mission would be complete. Her orders would be fulfilled. Her record would remain spotless. But everything in her experience told her that pulling that trigger would be the worst mistake of her life. The figure in the window moved again. This time, he began a different sequence of hand signals. Sarah watched in fascination as he began using gestures she had never seen before. Signals that were beyond even her highest level of training. But somehow she understood them, as if the meaning was being transmitted directly into her mind. The signals were telling her a story that changed everything she thought she knew about her mission. The man was telling her that he was Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Webb, Army Intelligence, that he had been tracking a conspiracy within their own military structure. That Sarah's mission was not what she had been told. According to his signals, Sarah was not here to eliminate a terrorist. She was here to eliminate him. The only witness to a weapons trafficking operation being run by senior military officers. Sarah's mind reeled. Webb's signals continued, painting a picture of corruption that reached to the highest levels of command. Weapons being sold to enemies. Intelligence being traded for personal profit. Soldiers dying because their missions were compromised from the start. And Sarah was being used as an unwitting assassin to clean up loose ends. Webb's final signal sequence was simple but clear. He was asking her to make a choice. Follow orders and become part of the conspiracy, or help him expose the truth and risk everything she had worked for. Sarah's radio erupted with angry voices. Viper 1, you're in violation of direct orders. A military police unit is being dispatched to your location. Engage target immediately or consider yourself under arrest. Sarah realized that the voices on her radio were not coming from her usual command structure. These were different people. People she did not recognize. People who seemed more concerned with her compliance than her safety. Through her scope, she watched Webb raise both hands in a gesture she finally recognized. It was the international signal for surrender. But he was not surrendering to her. He was surrendering to the situation, accepting that his mission to expose the conspiracy was about to end with his death. Sarah made her decision. Instead of aiming at Webb, she swung her rifle toward the rooftop of an adjacent building. Through her scope, she could see the muzzle flash suppressor of another sniper rifle. Someone else was in position, watching the same building. But this sniper was not focused on Webb. The rifle was aimed directly at Sarah's position. She was the real target. Webb had been right. This entire mission was designed to eliminate both of them. The only difference was that Webb knew he was being set up. Sarah squeezed her trigger just as the enemy sniper fired. Her shot struck the hostile sniper center mass, sending the body tumbling from the rooftop. The enemy's shot went wide, striking concrete inches from her head. Her radio exploded with confused voices. "What was that? Report your status immediately." Sarah ignored the radio. Instead, she began her own sequence of hand signals directed at Webb's window. Signals that told him she understood, that she was switching sides, that she would help him complete his real mission. Webb's response was immediate. He signaled coordinates for an emergency meeting point, instructions for avoiding the military police teams that would soon flood the area. Most importantly, he transmitted a code that would identify Sarah as a friendly operative to other members of his investigation team. Sarah began packing her equipment. The mission she had been sent to complete was over. But a new mission was just beginning, one that would either expose the conspiracy Webb had discovered or get them both killed in the process. As she prepared to move, Sarah realized that everything she thought she knew about her military career had been called into question. How many of her previous missions had been legitimate? How many times had she unknowingly served the interests of the conspiracy Webb was trying to expose? The rain continued to fall as Sarah slipped away from her position. Behind her, she could hear vehicles approaching, military police units that would find nothing but empty positions and evidence of a firefight. But they would not find her, and they would not find Webb, because both of them had just disappeared into the shadows of a war that was being fought within their own military structure. A war where the enemy wore the same uniform and spoke with the same authority as the people they were supposed to trust. Sarah moved through the industrial maze, following the route Webb had indicated. Each step took her further from the soldier she had been and closer to something she did not yet understand. But one thing was certain. The hand signals Webb had used were real. The conspiracy he had discovered was real. And the people who had sent her to kill him were willing to murder anyone who threatened to expose the truth. Sarah had always prided herself on following orders without question, on being the perfect soldier who never hesitated to complete her mission. But sometimes being the perfect soldier meant refusing orders from imperfect commanders. As she reached the extraction point Webb had indicated, Sarah realized that her real war was just beginning. And this time, she would have to decide for herself who the enemy really was. The abandoned subway station smelled of rust and decades of decay. Sarah moved through the darkness, her night vision goggles turning the underground tunnel into a green-tinted maze of broken concrete and twisted metal. Every sound echoed in the confined space, making her hyper-aware of each footstep on the debris-covered tracks. She had been moving for 2 hours since leaving her sniper position. The route Webb had signaled led through a series of industrial buildings, storm drains, and, finally, into this forgotten section of the city's transportation system. Sarah had avoided 3 military police checkpoints and 2 helicopter patrols by following his precise instructions. The meeting coordinates placed her deep underground, in a maintenance area that had been sealed off years ago. As Sarah approached the designated location, she began to understand why Webb had chosen this place. The thick concrete walls would block electronic surveillance. The multiple exit routes provided escape options. Most importantly, the location was off every official map. Sarah rounded a corner and froze. A figure stood in the shadows ahead, barely visible even with night vision. The person was holding something that reflected the faint light filtering down from street level above. Sarah 7 Echo, the figure said quietly. Sarah recognized the voice from their brief radio contact hours earlier. But, more importantly, she recognized the challenge code Webb had signaled to her. She responded with the countersign he had provided. Echo 7 Sierra. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Webb stepped into the light. Sarah had expected a typical intelligence officer, someone who spent more time behind a desk than in the field. Instead, she found herself facing a man who looked like he had been fighting this war for years. Webb was tall and lean, with the kind of weathered face that came from too many operations in hostile territory. His equipment was military-grade, but bore no insignia or identifying marks. Most telling were his eyes. They held the same haunted quality that Sarah recognized in her own reflection after particularly difficult missions. "Captain Martinez," Webb said, extending his hand. "Thank you for choosing to listen rather than shoot. Not many operators would have made that decision." Sarah shook his hand, studying his face in the dim light. "Your hand signals were very convincing. But I need to know what I've gotten myself into. And I need to know now." Webb nodded. "Fair enough. But first we need to move. Your former command structure has flooded this area with search teams. They're being very thorough about hunting for both of us." He led her deeper into the tunnel system, navigating by memory through passages that seemed to twist in impossible directions. Sarah noticed that Webb moved with the confidence of someone who had used these routes before. This was not a hastily chosen safe house. This was part of a carefully planned operational network. After 20 minutes of walking, they arrived at a wider section of tunnel that had been converted into a makeshift command center. Battery-powered lights illuminated computer equipment, communication gear, and wall maps covered with red pins and connecting strings. The setup looked like something from a spy thriller, but Sarah could see that every piece of equipment was military-grade and extremely expensive. "Welcome to the real war," Webb said, gesturing to the displays around them. "The one that officially doesn't exist." Sarah studied the maps and documents scattered across improvised tables. What she saw made her stomach clench. Names of senior military officers, bank account numbers, shipping manifests for weapons and equipment, photographs of meetings between American military personnel and known arms dealers. "How long has this been going on?" she asked. Webb powered up a laptop computer. "At least 5 years that we can prove. Possibly much longer." It started small. Individual officers selling surplus equipment for personal profit. But it grew into something much larger. The laptop screen displayed a network diagram that looked like a spider web of corruption. Sarah recognized several names from her own chain of command. Officers who had given her mission briefings. People she had trusted with her life. The conspiracy involves at least 30 senior officers across multiple branches of service, Webb continued. They've been using black operations and special mission units to eliminate witnesses and cover their tracks. Units like yours, Captain. Elite soldiers who follow orders without question. Sarah felt sick. How many missions were fake? How many people did I kill who were actually trying to expose this? Webb's expression softened. That's what I've been trying to determine. Your service record shows 47 confirmed kills across 3 deployments. I've been able to verify that at least 12 of those targets were actually undercover investigators or potential witnesses. The number hit Sarah like a physical blow. 12 innocent people. 12 deaths that she had carried out believing she was serving her country. 12 families who would never know that their loved ones had died trying to do the right thing. "I'm sorry," Webb said quietly. "I know how much it hurts to learn that everything you believed was a lie." Sarah forced herself to focus on the present situation. "What's your role in all this? How did you discover the conspiracy?" Webb turned to another computer screen. "I'm Army intelligence, but I work for a very small unit that investigates corruption within the military structure. We were created after several scandals in the 1990s, but our existence is classified above top secret. Officially, we don't exist." He pulled up a series of financial records. "I was assigned to investigate irregularities in weapons shipments to overseas bases. What I found was a systematic operation to divert military equipment to private buyers. The profits were being split among a network of officers who had compromised their oath of service." Sarah studied the financial data. The numbers were staggering. Millions of dollars in weapons and equipment. Bank accounts in countries that didn't cooperate with American law enforcement. A level of organized crime that reached into the highest levels of military command. When I got too close to the truth, they tried to eliminate me, Webb continued. 3 assassination attempts in the past 6 months. Each one made to look like enemy action or accidental death. Tonight was supposed to be the 4th attempt. Sarah realized the implications. They were using me to kill you, making me into an unwitting assassin. Exactly. And then they would have eliminated you as well. Probably during the extraction process. A heroic sniper killed in action while completing a vital mission against terrorism. Webb showed her another document, Sarah's own service record, but with additions she had never seen. False reports of psychological instability. Recommendations for removal from active duty. Evidence that someone had been building a case to discredit her even before tonight's mission. They've been planning this for months, Webb said. Your reputation as a perfect soldier made you the ideal weapon. But that same reputation made you a threat once you had served your purpose. Sarah felt anger building inside her. Anger at being manipulated. Anger at being used to murder innocent people. Anger at the betrayal of everything she had believed about military service and honor. What do we do now, she asked. Webb smiled grimly. We complete my real mission. We gather enough evidence to expose the entire conspiracy. And we do it before they realize that both of us are still alive. He led her to a wall covered with photographs and documents. Sarah could see that Webb had been building a comprehensive case against the conspiracy. Financial records, communication intercepts, surveillance photos, and sworn statements from witnesses who had managed to escape assassination. The problem is that almost everyone in the normal chain of command is either part of the conspiracy or has been compromised, Webb explained. We can't trust regular channels. We have to go directly to the top. Sarah studied the evidence spread across the wall. What exactly are you planning? Webb pulled out a communication device unlike any military radio she had ever seen. There's a congressional oversight committee that was created specifically to investigate this kind of corruption. They have the authority to bypass normal military channels and conduct their own investigation. He began entering codes into the device. But they need ironclad proof. Evidence that will stand up in court. Evidence that can't be dismissed as the accusations of disgruntled soldiers. Sarah understood. You want to get the conspirators on record. Catch them in the act. Exactly. And I know how to do it. There's a major weapons shipment scheduled for tomorrow night. $50 million in advanced military hardware being sold to arms dealers with connections to terrorist organizations. Webb showed her shipping documents and communication intercepts. The shipment was being coordinated by Colonel James Harrison, Sarah's own commanding officer, the man who had personally briefed her for dozens of missions over the past 2 years. Harrison thinks both of us are dead, Webb continued. He'll proceed with the shipment without changing security protocols. If we can document the transaction and identify all participants, we'll have enough evidence to bring down the entire network. Sarah felt the familiar weight of mission planning. But this time, the stakes were different. This time, she was fighting for something more than just following orders. What's the plan? She asked. Webb pulled up detailed schematics of a military depot located 30 miles from the city. The transaction is taking place at Forward Operating Base Charlie. It's officially closed for maintenance, but the conspirators have been using it as a private warehouse. Sarah studied the base layout. She had operated from similar facilities during her deployments. She knew the security systems, the patrol routes, and the vulnerabilities that could be exploited. I can get us inside, she said, but we'll need more than just surveillance. We need to get close enough to record conversations and identify everyone involved. Webb nodded. That's where it gets dangerous. We can't just observe from a distance. We need to infiltrate the transaction itself, get audio and video evidence that will be admissible in a court of law. Sarah realized what he was asking. They would have to pose as part of the conspiracy, get close enough to the weapons deal to document everything while surrounded by enemies who would kill them without hesitation if their true identities were discovered. I have credentials that will get us access, Webb said. False identities that are backed up in the military computer systems. But once we're inside, we'll be completely on our own. Sarah thought about her options. She could disappear, use her skills to vanish into civilian life somewhere far from this war. But that would mean abandoning the evidence that could expose the conspiracy. It would mean letting the corruption continue. More importantly, it would mean that the 12 innocent people she had unknowingly murdered would never receive justice. "I'm in," she said simply. Webb extended his hand again. "Welcome to the real special operations, Captain, where the enemy wears the same uniform we do, and victory means exposing the truth instead of burying it." As Sarah shook his hand, she realized that her military career was essentially over. Whether they succeeded or failed, she could never go back to being the soldier she had been. Too much had been revealed. Too many lies had been exposed. But maybe that was exactly what needed to happen. Maybe being the perfect soldier meant being willing to fight against imperfect commanders. Webb began gathering equipment for their infiltration mission. Sarah watched him work, recognizing the careful precision of someone who had been conducting covert operations for years. Tomorrow night, they would either gather enough evidence to expose one of the largest military corruption scandals in American history, or they would join the list of witnesses who had been permanently silenced. Either way, Sarah knew she was finally fighting for the right reasons. Forward Operating Base Charlie looked exactly like what it was supposed to be. An abandoned military facility slowly being reclaimed by nature. Weeds grew through cracks in the concrete. Buildings showed signs of weather damage and neglect. Guard towers stood empty, their searchlights dark and useless. But Sarah's trained eye could see the deception. Fresh tire tracks in the mud, despite the supposedly closed status. Windows that had been recently cleaned in buildings that should have been gathering dust for months. Most telling, the subtle modifications to the main warehouse that would allow for large vehicle access while maintaining the appearance of abandonment. Sarah crouched in the tree line 500 meters from the facility, watching through binoculars as the sun set behind mountains. Webb lay beside her, monitoring radio frequencies and checking their equipment one final time. "Transport convoy arriving in 30 minutes, he whispered, reading from an encrypted communication device. 3 vehicles carrying the buyers, plus Colonel Harrison's security team. Sarah adjusted her night vision scope, studying the approaches to the main warehouse. "I count 4 sentries in concealed positions. Professional setup. These aren't regular soldiers playing guard duty." Webb nodded grimly. Harrison hired private military contractors for security. Former Special Forces operators who work for money instead of honor. They'll shoot to kill without asking questions. Sarah felt the familiar pre-mission tension building in her muscles. But this time, the stakes were different. This time, failure meant more than just mission failure. It meant that the conspiracy would continue, and more soldiers would be used as unwitting assassins. "Equipment check," Webb said quietly. Sarah inventoried her gear. Suppressed pistol, Kumbaknief, tactical clothing designed to blend with shadows. Most importantly, the miniaturized recording equipment that would document everything they saw and heard. Webb carried similar equipment, plus the credentials that would get them access to the facility. According to the false identities he had created, they were representatives of a shell company that served as an intermediary for international arms dealers. "Remember," Webb said, "our story is that we're here to verify the quality of the merchandise before final payment. We need to get close to the weapons, record the serial numbers, and identify everyone involved in the transaction." Sarah studied the base layout one more time. "Once we're inside, what's our extraction plan?" Webb pointed to a service road that led away from the main facility. "Emergency vehicle staged 2 kilometers north. If everything goes wrong, we fight our way to that position and disappear into the mountains." Sarah appreciated the honesty. Webb wasn't pretending this would be easy. They were walking into a facility controlled by their enemies, surrounded by professional killers, with no backup except each other. "Movement on the access road," Sarah reported, watching through her scope. A convoy of black SUVs approached the base, their headlights cutting through the growing darkness. Sarah counted 6 vehicles total, more than Webb had expected. This was either a larger deal than they had anticipated, or security had been increased for reasons they didn't understand. Too many people, Webb muttered. Something's changed. Sarah watched as the vehicles entered the facility and disappeared into the main warehouse. Lights came on inside the building for the first time in months. The abandoned base was suddenly very much alive with activity. "We adapt," Sarah said simply. "More targets means more evidence if we can get it." Webb looked at her with something approaching admiration. Most intelligence officers would abort the mission at this point. Sarah smiled grimly. "I'm not most intelligence officers. And you're not asking me to kill anyone tonight. You're asking me to help expose the truth. That's a mission I can believe in." They began their approach to the facility, moving through the shadows between abandoned buildings. Sarah's sniper training had taught her patience and stealth, but Webb moved with equal skill, demonstrating that intelligence work required many of the same abilities as special operations. They reached the perimeter fence without detection. Sarah used wire cutters to create an entrance while Webb monitored guard positions with electronic surveillance equipment. "Guards are focused on the warehouse," he whispered. "Patrol routes suggest they're expecting trouble to come from the main access road, not from the rear of the facility." Sarah led the way through the fence and across open ground to the nearest building. From there, they could hear voices and vehicle engines coming from the warehouse. The deal was already in progress. They moved building by building, staying in shadows and avoiding the paths that guards would naturally use. Sarah felt the familiar calm that came during dangerous operations. Her breathing slowed, her senses sharpened. Every sound and movement became data to be processed and acted upon. At the rear of the warehouse, they found a maintenance entrance that provided access to the upper level of the building. Sarah picked the lock while Webb watched for approaching guards. Inside, the warehouse had been transformed into something resembling a legitimate business operation. Tables covered with paperwork, computer equipment for processing financial transactions, even a small conference area where negotiations could take place in relative comfort. But the centerpiece was the massive collection of military weapons and equipment laid out for inspection. Sarah recognized advanced rifle systems, portable missile launchers, communication equipment, and night vision gear. Millions of dollars in hardware that belonged to the American military. "Recording everything," Webb whispered, activating his concealed camera equipment. Sarah began documenting serial numbers and manufacturer information. Evidence that would prove the weapons had been diverted from legitimate military supplies. Below them, she could see Colonel Harrison directing the operation with the efficiency of someone who had done this many times before. He wore civilian clothing, but Sarah recognized his voice and mannerisms from years of mission briefings. The buyers were a mixture of well-dressed international businessmen and obvious military contractors. Sarah recognized the type from her overseas deployments. People who profited from conflict regardless of which side they claimed to support. Phase 1 complete, Harrison announced to the group. "All equipment has been verified and prepared for shipment. We can proceed with final negotiations." Sarah and Webb exchanged glances. Phase 1 suggested this was a larger operation than they had anticipated, perhaps involving multiple shipments or buyers. Harrison activated a large display screen that showed a map of the region. Red dots marked locations that Sarah recognized as conflict zones in 3 different countries. "Our network has successfully established distribution points in Syria, Afghanistan, and Somalia," Harrison continued. "Each location can handle monthly shipments of up to $20 million in military hardware." Sarah felt sick. This wasn't just about stealing and selling weapons. This was about deliberately prolonging conflicts in regions where American soldiers were deployed. The conspiracy was literally arming the enemies that their own military was fighting. "The beauty of a system is its self-perpetuating nature," Harrison explained to his audience. "Increased enemy capabilities justify increased American military presence." Increased military presence creates more opportunities for equipment diversion. Everyone profits except the soldiers who die fighting wars that were deliberately extending. Webb was recording everything, but Sarah could see the anger building in his expression. This was worse than simple corruption. This was treason on a scale that defied comprehension. One of the buyers, a man with an expensive suit and Middle Eastern accent, raised a concern. What about security? American intelligence services are becoming increasingly sophisticated in tracking weapons shipments. Harrison smiled confidently. We handle security through elimination of threats. Anyone who gets too close to discovering our operation is removed through carefully planned accidents or enemy action. He activated another screen showing photographs and files. Sarah recognized several faces. Intelligence officers who had died in supposedly random attacks. Soldiers who had been killed during routine operations that went wrong for unexplained reasons. In the past year alone, we've eliminated 17 potential threats to operational security, Harrison continued, including several military investigators who were getting too close to our financial networks. Sarah realized she was looking at a murder board. 17 people killed to protect the conspiracy. 17 families who would never know that their loved ones had been murdered by their own side. But then, Harrison displayed a new photograph that made Sarah's blood freeze. It was Webb's military ID photo, marked with a red X. Our most recent security concern was Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Webb, Army Intelligence, Harrison announced. He was eliminated yesterday during a routine sniper operation. The shooter was Captain Sarah Martinez, one of our most reliable unknowing assets. Sarah felt Webb tense beside her. According to Harrison's presentation, both of them were officially dead. Their elimination had already been reported up the chain of command. Harrison continued his briefing. With Webb eliminated, we can proceed with Phase 2 of our expansion. This involves establishing permanent weapons caches in 6 additional conflict zones, plus the recruitment of 10 new officers into our network. The scale was breathtaking. What had started as individual corruption had become an organized operation to fuel conflicts around the world for profit. And it was being run by American military officers who had sworn an oath to defend their country. One of the buyers asked about payment procedures. Harrison directed attention to a financial expert who began explaining a complex system of offshore accounts, shell companies, and cryptocurrency transactions designed to hide the money trail. Sarah realized they had everything they needed. Video evidence of the conspiracy, audio recordings of confessions to treason and murder, financial records that would allow authorities to freeze assets and track money flows. But they still needed to get the evidence out of the warehouse alive. Webb signaled toward the exit they had used to enter the building. Sarah nodded, understanding that they needed to retreat before someone discovered their presence. But as they prepared to move, Sarah heard a sound that made her heart stop. Heavy footsteps on the metal stairs leading to their level. Someone was coming up to check the upper floor. Sarah drew her suppressed pistol while Webb gathered their recording equipment. They had perhaps 30 seconds before the guard reached their position. Sarah made a quick decision. Instead of trying to hide, she moved toward the stairway. When the guard appeared, she struck him unconscious with the butt of her pistol before he could call for help. But the guard's radio crackled to life. "Rodriguez, report your status. Your patrol check is overdue." Sarah looked at Webb. They had maybe 2 minutes before the missing guard would be noticed, and the facility would go into lockdown. Webb activated an emergency beacon that would transmit their recorded evidence to his oversight contacts in Washington. But the transmission would take time, and it would also reveal their location to anyone monitoring communication frequencies. Below them, Sarah could hear Harrison continuing his presentation, unaware that his entire operation had been documented and was being transmitted to congressional investigators. But she could also hear increased radio chatter from the security teams. The missing guard had been noticed. "We need to move," Webb whispered urgently. Sarah led the way toward their planned escape route, but she could already hear vehicles starting up in the warehouse. The facility was going into lockdown. Every exit would be covered by armed guards within minutes. They reached the maintenance entrance they had used to enter the building, but Sarah could see flashlight beams approaching from multiple directions. The security teams were conducting a systematic search of the entire facility. Webb checked his transmission equipment. Evidence upload is 60% complete. We need 3 more minutes. Sarah calculated their options. They could try to fight their way out, but they were outnumbered at least 10-1 by professional soldiers. They could try to hide, but the search teams would eventually find them in a facility this size. Or they could do something completely unexpected. Sarah made her decision. Instead of trying to escape, she began moving back toward the warehouse floor where Harrison was concluding his presentation. "What are you doing?" Webb whispered. Sarah smiled grimly. "Creating a distraction. Keep that transmission running." Before Webb could stop her, Sarah kicked open the door to the main warehouse and strode into the middle of Harrison's presentation with her weapon drawn. "Good evening, Colonel," she announced loudly. "I believe you reported my death prematurely." The warehouse erupted into chaos. Buyers scattered for cover. Security guards reached for weapons. Harrison stared at Sarah as if seeing a ghost. "Captain Martinez," he said slowly, "you're supposed to be dead." Sarah kept her weapon trained on Harrison while using her peripheral vision to track the positions of his security team. "Sorry to disappoint you, but I had a few questions about my recent mission assignments." She could see Webb still concealed in the upper level, his transmission equipment working to upload their evidence. She just needed to keep everyone's attention focused on her for a few more minutes. "You've made a terrible mistake," Harrison said, signaling his guards to surround Sarah. "You have no idea what you're interfering with." Sarah smiled coldly. "Actually, I know exactly what I'm interfering with. A treason conspiracy that's been using American soldiers to murder witnesses and arm our enemies." Harrison's confident expression wavered. "You can't prove anything." Sarah gestured toward the weapons displays around them. "I think the evidence speaks for itself. Along with your very informative presentation about Phase 2 expansion plans." She could see realization dawning on Harrison's face. Sarah hadn't just stumbled into the facility. She had been recording everything. Harrison signaled his security team to move in for capture rather than kill. He needed to know how much evidence had been gathered and who else might be involved in exposing the conspiracy. But Sarah had no intention of being captured. Webb's transmission indicator showed 95% complete. Just a few more seconds. "The thing about being a sniper," Sarah announced to the room, "is that you learn patience. You learn to wait for exactly the right moment to take action." She triggered a small explosive device she had placed near the facility's main electrical panel during their infiltration. The lights went out, plunging the warehouse into darkness. In the confusion that followed, Sarah moved through the crowd using her night vision advantage and close combat training. She didn't need to fight everyone. She just needed to create enough chaos to complete Webb's transmission and reach their escape route. The lights came back on as emergency generators activated. But Sarah was no longer where Harrison's security team expected her to be. Webb appeared at her side, his equipment showing transmission complete. Evidence uploaded successfully. Congressional Oversight Committee has everything we recorded. Together, they fought their way toward the exit, using the warehouse's equipment and vehicles for cover. Harrison's security team was professional, but they were also confused and operating in an environment they hadn't prepared for. Sarah and Webb reached their planned escape route just as military vehicles began arriving from outside the facility. But these weren't Harrison's reinforcements. These were federal agents responding to the evidence transmission. As Sarah watched Harrison being placed under arrest by FBI agents, she realized that sometimes the perfect shot wasn't fired from a rifle. Sometimes it was fired by choosing to expose the truth instead of following corrupt orders. Webb stood beside her as more conspirators were arrested throughout the facility. "Welcome to the real war, Captain. The one where victory means justice instead of body counts." Sarah nodded, watching as the weapons that would have armed America's enemies were secured as evidence instead. 12 innocent people were still dead because of missions she had unknowingly carried out under false pretenses. But tonight, she had helped ensure that no more soldiers would be used as unwitting weapons in a war against their own values. Sometimes, being the perfect soldier meant refusing to be the perfect weapon.